This game is going to do damage to my sleep schedule. At the time of this record, Path of Exile 2 is launched into early access about 24 hours ago, after a particularly rough launch afternoon. More on that later. We streamed the game up until midnight on release day, and since then I've spent a significant amount of time off stream, in-game leveling my merc, and checking out Act 1 on both the Witch and the Sorceress. The last ARPG to get its hooks in me like this was Diablo 2. So this is a problem, because unfortunately, I have a few more responsibilities now than I did back in early high school. So time to put my time management skills to the test, I guess. Off the hop, I am exceptionally pleased with my time in game so far. I mean, sure, I have not made it to the endgame proper yet, but I would be very surprised to see a mechanical and tonal shift based on how strong of a showing Grinding Gear Games is making with the first few acts of the game. The game feels far more mechanically demanding in terms of moment-to-moment gameplay than almost any other ARPG I've played. Yes, this already tired metaphor does seem to be making the rounds again, but it fits. It really does feel like the Dark Souls of ARPGs. I mean, to wit, I'm spending what feels like equal amounts of time planning my movement, positioning, and dodges to respond to mob and boss actions as I am firing off skills in a way that complements one another and combos into something that's far more impactful than they are on their own. You're not going to mindlessly stroll through encounters here. And for me, that's a welcome paradigm shift in the genre. You know, regardless of how silly overpowered your individual build may become eventually, I'm a fan of game design that's mechanically challenging instead of just based on how many leading zeros there are on monster attacks. I mean, you might not feel that same way, which is fine, though you should know that this does seem to be the course that Grinding Gear Games is plotting. One last note on moment-to-moment gameplay mechanics. I've not yet tried the Warrior, so I can't comment on the feeling and efficacy of the new active blocking mechanics. If you have, drop us a comment so more people can get more points of data. Now, if you've not seen my previous video on Path of Exile 2, where I express equal parts concern and excitement about puzzle and game design directions, it's up here somewhere. I am very, very happy to say that thus far, the balance of complexity and layered systems feels right. Speaking more specifically from a psychological, educational, and behavior modification standpoint, the pace of system introduction, as well as opportunities for natural learning and repetition without becoming ridiculous, are well done. No point in my playthrough so far has felt obtuse, overwhelming from a metagame or layered system standpoint, or overly punishing. I very much appreciate the changes made to the skill gem system, which open the gates for experimentation and exploration of each character, without an antiquated opportunity cost attached. During stream on release day, we were briefly hard stopped by a boss due to the combination of my build at the time, what gear had dropped up until that point in the playthrough, and I mean, if I'm completely transparent here, probably a little bit of a skill issue as well. Apply a little bit of critical thinking and not being afraid of respawns. And we swapped some support skill gems around to something more single target focused, dropped the boss with a little bit of effort, and changed back to my mobbing build right afterwards. I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with that degree of flexibility from a quality of life standpoint. Further, the way all the systems work together to create a cohesive experience, every time I have died, or very nearly, and perhaps should have, I was never confused, except for once, about why I died. Enemy telegraphing is clear, makes sense, and contributes to a sense of self-efficacy that I don't see in many other games, and it's greatly appreciated. Visually, the game sets a distinct dark fantasy tone that I'm absolutely here for. And in terms of performance, outside of capping my frame rate, I don't think I've changed any other settings from what was auto-detected. And it's been spotless. Minus a flickering texture here and there. I think I noticed 2 over the course of my playtime so far. but steady frame rates, lighting effects have been cool, and not having a tantrum, it's great. Controller support and WASD movement both feel good to me, though each does come with some limitations of precision or menu navigation. I do suspect that your input method will likely influence what builds you gravitate towards, since things like AoE skills are far trickier to aim on a controller without an enemy to lock onto. I mean, this isn't a deal breaker for me, but you should know about it before jumping in and finding things needlessly frustrating. And as for things related to the game, but not actually in the game, there are some things to consider before you decide to spring for early access or not. Launch was rough. I've not checked my own account since it finally got linked. Steam was continuing to have problems, regardless of whether or not you created your account on the Grinding Gear Games site or not. Hopefully that's all sorted out by now. But the database problems and specifics of how all of their backend systems are connected are a point of potential concern for something this popular. That said, very few launches in recent memory, with comparable degrees of hype at least, have gone terribly great. So, weigh the possibility of future problems to your own tolerance and preference. Only 3 of the planned 6 story acts are in-game right now, and the current timeline of progression has us repeating acts 1 through 3 a second time on a higher difficulty so that we're appropriately leveled for endgame. Similarly, there are 12 character classes planned for launch, with 6 available currently. And additional ascendancies are also planned for all the characters, but in terms of what we have access to right now, I would say there's a reasonable variety of build and play style, and as a whole, it's pretty good. There is not individual character customization, if that's a thing that matters to you. For me, the model is going to be covered in armor and competing with particle effects on screen most of the time, so it's not a deal breaker, at least on my part. Totally get it if it is for you. The game will be fully free to play at launch, which is planned for 6 to 12 months from now if things go well. So if you want to be patient, the game will offer even more value at even less risk than it does right this second. The $30 price tag on early access also comes with $30 worth of store currency. So if you wind up playing for long enough that you would have bought things anyway, well, you basically just advanced Grinding Gear Games the money so that they can continue development. Not the worst thing. Absolute worst case scenario here. Let's say you only play through the campaign once and decide it's not for you after that. The devs say that campaign experience averages out to around 25 hours, which is quite close to at least my personal $1 per hour of entertainment rule I have when it comes to games. So there's my very early impressions of the Path of Exile 2 early access launch. Suffice to say, I'm stoked. Stoke levels are too high. Send help and stimulants, and maybe some tools for time management and task automation so I can spend more time not doing those tasks. I've been Bald Squid. I'll see you next time.